But you sent me something recently, and it was a clip, and it was like, Florida's got a people problem. And you could take that so many ways. There's so many ways. I was like, is this about Florida man, Florida woman? Is this about politics? But it was specifically talking about the number of people, how large the state is, and how quickly things like rent and the cost of living, while the median income, while the living wage basically stayed stagnant or the same. And it's something that I know I've pointed out multiple times, on the podcast. And it's something that you feel very passionately about because, your answer is usually work harder, get another job. If you don't like it, move, figure it out. But it gets to a point where you're like, okay, it's different if it's like 10 or 12 people. Like when it's thousands of people, this is becoming a very different conversation because a lot of these people are the people who make the economy.
I'm still a believer in that the people that are leaving are going to get replaced by people who are to travel more or do whatever they have to do to have a job.
Yeah, I think if you were to ask employers right now, they would tell you, nah, buddy, not true. And not, in particular, not in things like the service industry. We're looking at it right now, the American Auto Workers Union striking. UPS had a very intense negotiation, their union, and obviously the company, with the drivers coming out on top of that one. There are a lot of disgruntled people in this country. And as a business owner, I know you have your own feelings on that conversation. And I think what's been so eye-opening for me has been the comments on a lot of these episodes of this podcast. People who are in it, who are in the daily grind, who have been in corporate America, or who work in blue-collar, industries and things like that. And they're just like, listen, pay has been stagnant in this country for a very long time. Like we've discussed it at length. That $20 that you made in the 80s on a construction site an hour was big-time money in the 80s. The fact that they're making $25 now, 40 years later, is a testament to how little, the living wage has kept up with, or how little wages have kept up with the cost of living. The New Yorkers who came here in particular and drove up the prices, the folks from California who came here and drove up the prices in the pandemic and after, they always knew because they always vacationed here. LA people have always come here. People from Silicon Valley have always come here. We've had mayors that have been, petitioning for folks in Northern California to move their operations here. We've always had our, tax benefits in this state. Do you want to hear
something crazy, though? I was discussing this with my attorney last week. People don't even realize. 2030, 60% of the single-family homes in this country will be owned by corporations.
Yeah.
So that little piece, that little tidbit is driving the single-family home prices and keeping them up because the people who are buying them don't care what they pay for them. They're long-term assets. You would expect as the interest rates go up, property values go down. That's kind of how it works. That's how the Fed adjusts things. Mm-hmm. But that's not happening because BlackRock and a few other companies are buying up all the residential real estate.
Okay, but that doesn't detract from the point that people can't afford to rent them from these companies either.
Yeah.
People have always owned and rented. Like that wasn't always a big, deal. Yes, you could get a fairly reasonable home here, but you could also rent here for, which means you could work, as a bartender and go to school and, live in an apartment. I told you my first apartment on South Beach was $600 or $650 a month. Granted, that was, of course, 20 years ago.
A big part of it is the city of Miami in the past 15, 20 years has become a real city. No, but listen, it's part of it.
I get that, but you're giving it too much credit. You're talking about 20 years. Len, people could afford their rent in 2020, and in 2021, they couldn't anymore. We're talking about overnight. The article you sent me, the clip you sent me, was talking about that's where people got Yeah. Nobody could save enough for a rainy day to afford a $2,000 a month increase in your rent, or even a $500 a month rent increase in your rent. And it's still happening now, and the pandemic is way over. Like, every time we have a conversation like this, or every time I share some sort of information along this, somebody slides in my DMs and is like, yo, this is crazy. I just had to renew my lease. They raised my rent by $500. And these are everyday folks, maybe making 45, 50, 55, 60 grand a year. You know what I'm saying? Where before that wasn't an issue. Now they're having to make decisions like, okay, am I going to stay here? Am I going to pay the $5? And then what does it cost to move? And all of these things. And all I'm saying is the folks moving here always knew that Miami had a value, but they couldn't work from home. They couldn't work remotely. They had to be in New York City paying New York City taxes because that is where their office was. And you were expected to be in the office 5 days a week, get on that plane, fly to Miami for a weekend, and then get on the first thing smoking on Monday morning and be back in the office. And you could do that. You're right. Over the last 15 or 20 years, the cost of living has been going up, incrementally in Miami, and people were leaving and they were going to Atlanta, right? Because, they heard, oh, you can come to Atlanta and, oh my God, what you can get in terms of a house in Atlanta compared to what you can buy in Miami is basically the same thing of what you could buy in Miami versus what you could get in New York, right? Like it was that whole, so now New Yorkers just kind of became the new Miamians moving to Atlanta. But the scary thing is that it happened, like I said, so quickly, and so many of the people that make this economy work, whether it's service industry people, hotel staff, folks who work in the backbone industries just can't make it happen. And to your point, even the places where they once could afford to live are now, of course, being gentrified because got to make way for the folks that are willing to pay, right? So you're seeing it on Cayocho right now, right? This historically Latin community, which by many was considered run down and dilapidated, but had a big cultural, And have you seen it lately?
No. Going crazy?
It's wild. There's a ton of incredible restaurants over there. Anymore. There's a ton of, new high-rise condos going up over there. Folks that owned multiple pieces of property, but that were predominantly renting probably to elderly Section 8 people are now praying for their leases or somebody to die so that they can go in, put on a new coat of paint, swap out some fixtures, and go from getting, $1,100 a month to getting $3,300 a month. Like, it's crazy. And you know who is the fastest rising group of homeless or, housing challenged individuals in the state of Florida right now?
Who?
The elderly. And the problem is when you raise the rent on the elderly who are on fixed incomes, as we know, right, and they get evicted because they don't pay their rent, now that's on your credit report. And now as you're trying to seek out new housing, you can't get approved anywhere, right? So even if you have the funds, a family member that's willing to help you, you can't necessarily get the approval. And we don't have the facilities to house all of these people.
Part of this is got to be being caused by community planning also. Florida's always been a very loose state. We have a right to work. We're a right to work state, so we don't have unions. I mean, there is unions here, but they typically don't control everything that we do. We can use non-union companies if we want to. We never had, what do they call it in New York when they have the rent control? Yeah, we have never had any rent control. And now you got developers coming in, buying postage stamps and putting 100 units on it. And that goes to the city planners. Somewhere, somehow, somebody's voting in people who are, pro-city and growing. It's kind of what I was off. You said I was off the chain a little bit before. Growing up here, born and raised, the city of Miami was not a traditional city. No one lived in the city of Miami until 15 years ago. You just didn't live there. It was only a city. At 5 o'clock it closed.